Hey Will, do you want any coffee?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
What? Never smelled Jamaican Blue Mountain before?
What? What? Why are you, wearing...
What?
Where'd you get all this shit?
It's Earthworm Jim. Come with me, if you will, to a time that land forgot. To an era once overpopulated by denim jackets, where bleached hair was acceptable among both women and men, and where licensed games were just as abundant as the squiggly lines and shapes all over movie titles. Welcome to the 90s. Okay, I admit, I was a child of the 90s, and I still embrace a lot of the culture today. I mean, Nickelodeon cartoons? Yes. Disney full-length animated masterpieces? Yes. Video games of Super Nintendo, Mario 64, and Zelda, Monkey Island, and Pokemon? Yes, please. But all that love for the era doesn't mean that I thought this was ever a good look. I mean, shit was weird back then. And what better game to represent the wonderful weirdness of the 90s than Earthworm Jim? Both Earthworm Jim and its sequel are considered to be the pinnacle of the run-and-gun genre of the 16-bit era. The games are praised not only because they're incredibly frantic and fun shooters, but also because the game's personality has an extremely strong presence. Despite their outward appearance and inherent weirdness, the Earthworm Jim games are still some of the most beautiful and polished of their time. They're an intense smorgasbord of shapes and colors with a huge variety of environments, ranging from depths of hell to intergalactic rocket rides to even a level made entirely out of meat. Breakfast. Not to mention one of the most frustrating levels in all side-scrolling history. The art design, meanwhile, completely embodies the 90s animation style, taking hints from cartoons at the time and crafting a look that simply oozed character. While most of the companies were producing crappy-looking sprite art, the Earthworm Jim production team was hiring real animators to work on the game. All the character sprites were hand-drawn, giving the game some of the most fluid animation ever seen in that era. And Earthworm Jim 2 continued this trend of wackiness by simply building upon everything that people loved in the first game. You have more ridiculous weapons, characters, and levels that at the very least make you go, what the is that a fallen grandma? And the weapons, oh man, were they sweet. You got the machine gun going, and the homing gun that was actually shaped like a freaking house, and the huge plasma gun that was just like... Now doesn't that sound like an awesome game?
I guess, but I mean, isn't it trying a little bit too hard to be different for the sake of being different?
Okay, true, you could say that the Earthworm Jim games were a bit too zany for their own good, and that the 90s style is dated and cliched, but I think the games are more than likely looking for an identity in a sea of middling platformers. I mean, come on, look back at the mid-90s. Companies were throwing IP after IP at developers, churning out more and more licensed games every year, just all in hopes of making a quick buck off their franchise. You figure, take a game, slap a popular celebrity or character on the box, and boom, they're rolling in the dough.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there were some good licensed games. It's not like they didn't exist. It's like, take for example Aladdin and Turtles in Time. Some of those games ended up being among the best of that generation.
Yeah, but do I have to remind you of the others that weren't so lucky? I mean, Combat Basketball, perhaps?
Oh, please don't say that. Don't talk. We never talk about that game.
So going against everything that made sense, Earthworm Jim's creator, Doug TenNapel, decided to begin the franchise's life as a video game instead. He saw value in building a solid foundation as a game rather than debuting the character as a comic or TV show and then churning it into some shovelware for the consoles. And it worked! He pretty much reversed the polarity of licensed games and eventually went on to create both a full-fledged animated series and a toy line based on Earthworm Jim. That sort of marketing model still exists today, with a lot of big budget titles now being the source material of tie-ins, instead of the other way around. In my opinion, it's a much more efficient way of creating quality material, as the characters in video games can just be as fleshed out and diverse as any comic book or movie character. And the Earthworm Jim games have the advantage of being some of the finest action platformers to come out of that era. Yes, the sheer weirdness of the games might turn people off, but it's the intricacies of the game's execution that I really appreciate. They literally hold nothing back and aren't afraid to throw curveball after curveball at the player. The strongest example of this is in Earthworm Jim 2's level, the Villi People. In it, Jim is disguised as a blind cave salamander and has to swim his way through a catacomb of intestinal lining, all while Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata plays in the background.
That sounds like the stupidest idea for a level I've ever heard.
And it gets better. After you make it through all that, the level concludes with a game show quiz in which none of the questions make any sense. I mean, on paper it sounds downright absurd, maybe even stupid, but it's probably one of the greatest levels in platforming history. And not because of how bizarre it is, but because of how the level is executed within the context of the game. As you travel further and further through the area, the level actually begins to feel kind of normal. Just another swim through the giant small intestine. Oh, good old pinball bumpers, just as I remember. How have you been? Oh, exploding cheap. Haven't seen you in ages. Blame it on the slow pacing or relaxing music, but the surreal vibe really dulls the senses and kind of gives you time to kick back and enjoy the scenery. Believe it or not, it's the quiz show that actually grounds the level in reality, so to speak. The game's own excessive nature is kind of what masks the level's normalness, and it's that kind of balance that actually makes the Earthworm Jim game so good. Sure, it may be like trying to balance a 2-ton weight on a seesaw, but I mean, for every trip to hell, there's a simple trip underground. For every level 8, there's a level 5. And as short as the games are, the variety of levels is the one thing that keeps me coming back to enjoy them. I mean, they were freaking awesome. I mean, like the inflatable head stage where you use Jim's head as a hot air balloon, or Andy Asteroids where you race Psycho through space, or that one where you're in a bubble. Wait, no, fuck that stage. When it comes down to the meat and potatoes, the Earthworm Jim games are just two amazing platformers that really do stand the test of time, both visually and mechanically. Now I say two because, well, the third one was a piece of shit. But don't take my word for it. Here's what one of the guys who actually worked on the first two games has to say about it.
Every single thing that made Earthworm Jim great was shat upon in Earthworm Jim 3D.
But I digress. I love Earthworm Jim. It encapsulates everything great about the 90s style, both in terms of games and art. Ideas were still new, and it seemed like nothing was off limits back then. The developers were allowed to push their imaginations to the fullest, which is something that I feel is really lacking in today's brown and gray Space Marine day and age. And most importantly, they had the one thing that so many games lacked at the time. A soul. Small things like Jim's idle animation, or the horrible sound that Pete the puppy made when he transformed, or even the snowman enemies in What the Heck. All these little nuances, they invited you in and made you feel like you were, pardon my Disney, part of their world. Most games use their story and character development to draw people in and create lasting connections with the game. Earthworm Jim did that by look and feel alone. Nowadays, you'd be hard-pressed to find the game, let alone a platformer, that captures the same kind of spirit and passion for fun that Earthworm Jim had. The closest you'll probably get is Guacamelee or Rayman Legends. I mean, these games really have a great sense of style and personality that helps separate them from the crowd. But to me, Earthworm Jim still stands alone as my favorite action platformer of all time.